this is a segue into, I guess, if you're going to go to the Constitution, we're going to go to standing now, and we're going to go to New York, and we're going to go to COVID lockdown measures. And who gets to challenge them, who gets to succeed, and who gets to get overturned because of lack of standing. This was a lawsuit brought by, was it a senator or a congressman? I don't know if it makes a difference.
By legislator, by a group of legislators and others.
Brought against Kathy Hochul, or the government now. I don't think Kathy Hochul was in charge.
The commie governor of New York.
About COVID lockdowns, quarantine measures, and they were saying these are unlawful, these are unconstitutional, yada, yada, yada. They win at the lower level. The lower court says these violate the separation of powers. They're unconstitutional. I think I might be bastardizing this. You'll tell me if I did. And then it goes to the appeals court, and the appeals court of New York says, we reverse the decision because they lacked standing. I don't know how anybody on earth who's governed by a law could lack standing to challenge the law by which they are governed that might result in their imprisonment. From what I understood, though, they said you lack standing because if you want to challenge this law, take it up with the legislature and not with the courts, which I don't understand, because if the legislature adopts a law that is violative of the Constitution or whatever rights, you can only go to court to challenge it. They didn't remand it. They overturned the decision and they said, you lack standing to challenge it. When the lower court said it violates your rights, you might be right, but you didn't have the interest to bring that suit. How do you make that make sense to a layperson, Robert?
It was very simple. They wanted to excuse the governor's power in the first place. The New York courts have been very friendly and favorable to all the abuse of quarantine power, because a lot of your public health based laws are rooted in quarantine principles. And the traditional quarantine principles are constitutionally constrained. This goes back to the debate with Dershowitz, and Dershowitz acknowledged, and by the end of the debate, agreed to the legal standards that I set up at the beginning of the debate, which is he recognized you should have clear and convincing evidence that someone poses an imminent risk to others' safety or well-being before you can require that they take any particular vaccine under those circumstances. There has to be substantial risk if they don't do it to other people. It has to be certain that taking the vaccine will substantially reduce that risk, and that the way in which there has to be clear and convincing evidence that the government must meet the burden. And he also agreed ultimately that this should go through all processes, that any quarantine laws should first be passed by the legislative branch, then approved by the executive branch, then authenticated, and then any dispute concerning its enforcement go to the judicial branch. That's what didn't happen here. There was no legislative action. The executive branch usurped that authority and decided to rewrite the rules using its quarantine powers, which, by the way, the Alex Joneses of the world have been warning about for 25 years, saying this quarantine power is a dangerous power. That's where the old FEMA camp line came up. For many years, if you listen to InfoWars, the initial announcer would be, welcome to FEMA District 22, live from behind the resistance. But he was right all along. I mean, it's the reason why it's in X-Files, who Jones, by the way, was friends with several of the authors on there. You should go look at The Lone Gunman, episode 1, right? About 6 months before 9/11. See what it predicted there. Might be kind of interesting for folks if you want a little hush-hush style fun. But that is the core of the issue, is this misuse and abuse of quarantine authority outside constitutional constraints. And one of the ways they do so is the legislature never has any role in it. And here the legislature sued because they're like, we didn't get a chance to write these rules. You're just changing the rules and dramatically extending and expanding them way past quarantine. Because quarantine is there's an immediate emergency, number one. Number two, you have the disease. And number three, you present an imminent risk to others that can only be remedied by quarantining. That has nothing to do with stay-at-home orders. That isn't what quarantine law is ever approved of. And that's what the governor was saying. Well, we're just going to rewrite him and say, well, we have the right to do this, so why do we have the right to do everything else? And the courts are like, yay. And then the legislature sues saying this is our prerogative, not yours. And what do the courts say? Oh, you don't have standing to come to us. Ha, ha, ha.
After a lower court said it was already violative of the separation of powers. That's what blows my mind. And did it issue the ruling against the legislators as legislators or as citizen petitioners?
It issued them for the legislature as part of their legislature, as well as part of organizational groups and other components that they denied standing to everybody. That's what I've always said. Standing is a bogus doctrine, an invented doctrine.
But then, Robert, under this case, who would have had standing to bring the suit?
Only somebody that's locked away. That's what the court made clear. They're only going to let the subject of the suit bring suit. And even then, watch, they'll find excuses, pretext.
No, but then they're going to say it was a legislative decision. You, as a victim of the legislation, have no recourse. Vote them out of office.
Though they may easily come up with another cop out. And what it reveals is these judges that love these rules and restrictions know they can't meet constitutional scrutiny. And so they find every procedural trick in the book to avoid ruling on the merits, which is one of the oldest games judges play. And they've been playing the Pontius Pilate pretextual game of I wish I could get involved, but golly gee, I can't.
Robert,
since Pontius Pilate.
I know, and you always talk about it. Just for those who may not know, what's the Pontius Pilate reference? It's the man who threw Jesus under the bus and said, "I had to do it."
Oh, except he didn't do it. The other people did it. He wished he could do something about it, but he just couldn't get involved. Sorry, seems kind of unfair, but I'm staying out of. I can't get involved. That's why I call it a Pontius Pilate pretext. It's judges who know they're wrong on the law, usually like the politics of the bad law, and so they say, "Golly gee, we just can't get involved. You have no right to sue." Even though it makes no sense, because the U.S. Constitution simply requires there be a case or controversy. That's all. Not that you have standing. Now, maybe you don't meet the cause of action, right? Maybe you haven't been injured, but that should be a different analysis, not whether you have access to courts to begin with. Here, these legislators representing the legislature of New York have been injured because their legislative power has been usurped by the governor illegally, unconstitutionally. And yet the courts are saying, nah, nothing we can do about it. Screw you.
Do they send it back for remand, or is it over?
That's over. Now they could try to take it to another higher court, but that's all. At this point, somebody that has to be subject to it and what they're doing is they know these emergency powers will stay dormant until something scary happens, and then the courts will run and hide when someone's actually injured by these laws.
Oh, you mean
like, say, we're in the middle of an emergency.
Yeah, like the next respiratory virus that's raging across China. Oh my goodness. But Robert, speaking of respiratory viruses raging across countries and people going to social media to make very offensive posts, I forget, it's out of New York, this one, the guy who put up the they've got orders to shoot and kill.